St. Mary's Rectory, and the food bank is right next to the rectory. And yeah, they open that little gate there at 10. You wind your way down the stairs, and you get whatever it is that they're given. I have yet to meet anyone from the Seattle Stranger or the Seattle Weekly in line at the food bank, which means that they're getting paid enough to the point where they don't have to do this, So that right there tells you, what's at stake. I mean, the Seattle Weekly didn't return my calls. The Seattle Stranger said that they're afraid I'll scare away their advertisers. So that corporate censorship results in someone as capable as me standing in a line like this.
How long have you been doing this?
Ever since I moved here. It's been about 2 years now. You're going to find that the first people that get here are the Russians, the Asians, and they're all elderly, which is to say that, they have yet to master English, and as a result, they get what they can get. Some folks talk trash about them, claim that they cut in line and whatnot. I don't blame them. I mean, when you're old and you don't know the language and you're in another land, you ought to be given every break possible. So yeah. And then after, I don't know, maybe about, within the next hour or so, the line will wrap around this corner, and then it'll go from being Russian and Asian to black and poor white trash. I mean, it's very indicative of America, this line, and folks, when you see the line wrap around the corner, keep that in mind the next time they start talking about more money for the war in the Middle East. War is plural.
We were looking through a copy of AD, and it was dedicated to the man who saved your life. Care to explain what that means?
Tommy Gunn. Tommy Gunn is Tomas Carl Berger. He in the face, he looks exactly like Corey Nemec from Parker Lewis Can't Lose. He was an actor who was also in The Stand, Stephen King's The Stand. Tommy Gunn. Tommy Gunn is he was a physics major at UC Davis, and then he went on to UCSD, University of San Diego, to get his PhD in physics. And now he has a wife and 2 kids, and yeah. But at the time, God, I haven't thought about this in a while. I had known him since high school, and when my grandfather died in late 1990, he left me $30K, and while I was waiting for the $30K, I was homeless. I was living in my cousin's garage, and I was going to community college, Solano Community College in Northern California, about 50 miles northeast of San Francisco. And at the time, Tommy Gunn was the only one that helped me out, at least to a large extent. He would feed me, he'd give me rides, he'd let me use his phone. And when the inheritance finally did come, he drove me to San Francisco so it could be cashed. The check was such that, it couldn't be cashed in the town that we were in. We had to go to the bank that it was cut from in order to cash it. And that's how I got into San Francisco State. This was, I was on the streets from, when was it? The summer of 1991 to the summer of 1992. And yeah, that's Tommy Gunn.
That's how he saved your life?
Oh yeah, I was doing all kinds of stuff in order to survive. When I was living in my cousin's garage, he wouldn't let me inside the house. He wouldn't let me use the phone or the washing machine or the bathroom even. It was just a garage. And so oftentimes I would go to Tommy Gunn's house for food, for all the basic necessities, amenities of life. And so, yeah. Yeah, so one for him. I shudder to think where I'd be today.
So what is the most desperate point you've been driven to?
I'd say that was it. Oh my God. I mean, it was pretty bad. I remember one time I went to a bar and they had a happy hour, and during the happy hour they had free hors d'oeuvres, and so I would just scarf those, you know. But and there's nothing like going, excuse me. There's nothing like going to a bar and not buying anything. The looks that you get, I mean, it's just harsh. God, let's see what else. During that period, man, I remember, because I didn't have access to my cousin's bathroom, I had to line an ice bucket with a plastic bag and shit in that. Oh yeah, you know, piss in a sports bottle, you know, and then dump everything, you know, tie the bag up and then, you know, dump it out in the woods or something. Oh, I was practically camping.
So your cousin preferred that to letting you in the house?
There was some issue as to whether or not I was actually his cousin. I couldn't prove it, but since my uncle is James Lofton, number 80, Packers, Raiders, Bills, and since like all too many, you know, my cousin was addicted to football, you know, he didn't want to miss out on the chance of helping out someone related to a big football superstar. And so, when I was on the street, I literally grabbed the phone book, cracked it open, and looked under L for Lofton, you know, and I called every number, and when Ernest picked up the phone, you know, I said, hey, you know, you might want to check your family tree, we're related. He didn't check it. All he heard was his Uncle James is a football star. That's all he cared about. And so he let me in, but under these very strict conditions. So
you don't know if he's actually your cousin or not?
I'd say there's probably a 90% chance that we were related. He looked like me. The rest of his family looked like me, but, you know, he didn't bother to check, and I didn't press the issue. All I knew is I needed shelter. I mean, again, let me see, we're talking June 12th, 1991 to July 3rd, 1992. So it was over a year.
What was the cause? Why did you start living on the streets?
When my grandfather died, I was living in San Francisco. I was a substitute teacher's aide. But I wasn't making enough because there weren't enough assignments. I mean, substitute teacher, yeah. Substitute teacher's aide, not so much. I mean, there's just, you know, not enough for you to do. They cut the budgets to the point where teachers no longer had aides. So, you know, it was all the less for me to do, you know. So the lack of money resulted in a lack of ability to pay the rent. I had to move back in with my mom. This was early 1991. And this would have been up here in Bremerton, Washington. And it was bad enough living at home, but there was nothing really for me to do, you know. And my stepdad was in the mix, and he and I definitely don't get along. So a buddy of mine in California said, come stay with him. And so I did. I turned around, went right back down south, and by the spring of 1991, April, May of 1991, I had moved in with this guy I knew, Rich Wilson. Well, everything was fine. I was living in Rich Wilson's garage. And then one day he and I got into an argument about affirmative action. You know, he being white, being against it. I was for it. He kicked me out. And I spent that first night in an abandoned building. And it was June 12th, I remember that day, June 12th, 1991. And the abandoned building, despite it being June in California, it's freezing. And so I went to a shelter, and then that's, you know, when I cracked open the phone book and looked for, you know, because the shelter would only let you stay there for 1 month. So I had 30 days to find someplace else to stay. And so I cracked open the phone book, looked under Lofton, and lucked out. You know, bizarre. I know.
Have you seen this cousin since?
No. When I got the inheritance, I broke him off a little something. I gave him like a few $100, but you know, I haven't heard or seen him since. So.
Could you talk a little about your wrestling managing career?
Well, hold on. Let me sit down for that. Here. That way I'm not hogging up the seat here. Okay. Professional wrestling. The beauty of professional wrestling, it's for those who believe no explanation is necessary. For those who don't, no explanation will ever do. The problem with one of the many problems with American culture is this psychotic fixation with competition. This notion that, well, the litmus test of worthiness lies in some form of meritocracy. In other words, if you can't prove yourself on the field of battle, or you can't prove yourself, you know, in some game, then you're less than worthy, you know, and that has gotten America into more trouble than you can possibly imagine. The beauty of professional wrestling lies in the fact that it is choreographed, it is scripted. And the reason why is because it channels violence, it harnesses violence, it steers violence towards a positive end. Sure, a soccer match is, quote, legitimate, end quote, in the sense that, you know, assuming that they haven't rigged the event, that what you see is what you get, more or less. But then look at the riots afterwards. They're taking the damn thing way too seriously. And so, in professional wrestling, if you walk into it knowing that what you're seeing is fiction, then it will act as a stopgap, and it will prevent people from taking it so seriously to the point where they riot afterwards. And it's a similar dynamic with football. I mean, people take that way too seriously. Look at the Super Bowl. The thing lasts all day long, you know. So, with professional wrestling, it's only on a couple of hours at a time, even if it's WrestleMania or some big event like that. And because it's fixed, people know not to get too carried away about it. Also, too, it stimulates the imagination, which is something that America definitely needs. In other sports, you got two identical teams wearing two identical outfits, and every interview is the same. We went out there and we gave 110%, and there is no I in team. And you interview the guy in the opposing team, and he says exactly the same thing. It is boring, absolutely boring. Professional wrestling, you can't be bored. It's not possible. I fell in love with professional wrestling immediately. Very first match I ever saw was in 1983. Tito Santana versus Greg the Hammer Valentine, when they were wrestling in AWA, the American Wrestling Alliance. And I've been hooked ever since. When I did it, it was, 1989, and the town that I went to high school in is Fairfield, California. But right next door is a place called Vacaville, which is where the Vacaville prison is. You know, that's its claim to fame, I guess, geographically speaking. And so Vacaville's community center had what they called the Vacaville Wrestling Federation, run by a guy named Mike Cariglio, who is also known as Mike Stone or Mr. USA. And so Mike ran it, and he is a trip. He really knew what he was doing. He had it where 4 times a year we would come to the Vacaville Community Center, and we'd help erect the ring, and we'd have a packed house each and every time. He did it from the fall of 1998 until about 1990, and I was with them from, let me see, the spring event of '89, spring, summer, and fall, those 3 events. And I was the judge. I wore a black robe. It was my high school graduation robe. And I went and had a gavel, a custom-made gavel made. And I still have that. I'll have to show that to you. And I would use the gavel as a foreign object, just as Jimmy the Master of the South Hart would use his megaphone as a foreign object, just as Jim Cornette would use his tennis racket as a foreign object. Oh no, it's raining. Great. Hold on one second.
Hold the book here over the camera.
I don't think that will help.
That sucks. Yeah, one of the many perils of standing in line outdoors at the food bank, get rained on in a rainy town like this. When I was the judge, I managed 3 guys: the Mexican Marauder, Anton the Crusher, and the Commando. And the Commando was a guy with a mask, and the mask had camouflage on it. The Mexican Marauder was a big, giant stereotype with a big sombrero and a poncho, and Anton the Crusher was just, generic wrestler type. And so, yeah, I actually have clips of that on VHS. I don't know if you're able to convert VHS to...
We might be able to.
Okay, I've got that at home too. Good times, There was a wrestling school, and the wrestling school is somewhere in Northern California. I can't think of where. But there was a point in which their stable teamed up with the VWF. And even though the VWF was mainly comprised of folks that were in their late teens and early 20s, and the Jerry Monty School, I think it was called, was comprised of much older wrestlers, we still outperformed them. The response we got was far better than the response that they got. So it's something to be proud of. We were also part of a parade. Wish I had footage of that. We were on public access. We were on a radio show. All during the summer, fall of 1989. And yeah, we would all be in character. We would all, maintain our personas, whenever. That was the first time I ever signed an autograph, was as the judge. That was cool.
I mean, what was your distinct personality?
Oh, I was a bad guy. I was a villain. There were 2 managers. Typically good guy wrestlers don't have managers or valets. On the bad guy side, there was a guy named Hollywood Hunter, and then the judge. And so we basically split the bad guys between us. I would manage the monsters, the big bruisers, the guys that, would brawl. And then he would manage all the wicked, more scientific wrestlers, the ones that, would have a lot to say and they would cheat and so forth. Pro wrestling fans are going to know what I mean when I say that. So I had the monsters, and he had, the more sinister types. And so yeah, the forces of evil in the Vacaville Wrestling Federation were split between me and Hollywood Hunter. Yeah, good times. A couple of us tried to go for the big time. There was talk of scouts coming to check out the VWF. I think Mike Coriglio got the furthest. He did some wrestling, I think, for I don't know for what though, but he was what they call dog meat, which is where a superstar wrestler, a big name wrestler would, work on some unknown, some obscure guy. They don't do that so much anymore, but back in the 80s, they did it a lot, in the early 90s. And so, for a time, Mike Coriglio was what they call dog meat. There was a wrestler called Stacy, Mr. Beatbox Carlton. He was a good guy who often fought my bad guys. And he was a really big black guy, and he had 3 black women dancing with him, and they all passed out Winchell's donuts. It was wild. And so he was being seriously looked at by the big boys, by the WWE and, well, at the time it was WWF and the NWA and so forth, but nothing ever came out of it. And I don't know, it was nice of him to offer. He said that if he made it, he would take me with him, you know. But again, nothing came out of it. You know, I never heard from, I haven't heard from any of those folks in years. God, it would have had to, let me see, jeez, it's been 20 years. God, I'm old.
Did you ever physically fight yourself, or?
There was the one time when Stacy Mr. Beatbox Carlton got tired of me cheating, got tired of me running into the ring and interfering, and so he challenged me to a match. And in the last event I did, the fall 1989 event, I got in the ring and we had this spiel where, you know, he pushed me down and he was about to belly flop me, which would have been painful because he is like 300 plus. And then one of my guys, it was Anton the Crusher, he runs in and he, you know, he sticks him, and then they go from there. And then that gave me a chance to weasel out of the ring.
And so all this was choreographed?
Oh, it had to be. I mean, it's very, there was a guy who he didn't grasp the concept. His whole thing was he wanted to prove how strong he was. You know, he had this thing to prove. He was on a macho kick. And so we're in rehearsal, we're in practice, and in order to do a suplex, God, let me see. Mind if I?
All right.
This won't hurt at all. I just need to show. All right, bend over. Okay. In order to do a suplex, this part in here goes this way, and then you have to like grab a hold, and then the idea being is when oh wait, hold on. Crouch down on your knees. No, not too far. Just like you're about to jump.
Okay.
Notice, not even that, but more like this.
Okay.
Yeah, all right, right there, bend. All right, now, notice how his knees are bent. What has to happen during a suplex is, once I get a secure enough hold, he jumps on cue. And then that's when the suplex happens, when I take him backwards, and then that's how the slam happens. But in the case of this one guy who wanted to prove again how macho he was, what he did was he refused to jump on, no, I remember what it was. He was the one giving the suplex. But instead of waiting for the guy that he was giving the suplex to crouch, as David just did, he tried to lift the guy to show how, you know, oh, I'm strong enough, I can lift this guy without him helping, without him, you know, crouching and jumping up. He almost broke the guy's neck. And Mike Criglio made it a point. It's like, look, you know, our insurance cannot cover this. We are not the WWE, you know, and so you get like one chance and you're out.
And
we had to kick the guy out because, you know, we told him like 1,000 times, you know, even if it doesn't look realistic, you know, rather it not look realistic and save a guy's life as opposed to it looking realistic and killing someone or crippling someone. And so, you know, he didn't understand. He didn't understand because, you know, there's a reason why, what is it, Ultimate Fighting Championship? Is that what it's called? Yeah, Ultimate Fighting Champ. There's a reason why it's so popular. It's so popular because the presumption is that what you're saying is a real fight. Well, okay, but is it worth someone's life? You know, I mean, it's like in order for humanity to evolve, you have to find morally superior ways to satiate that bloodlust. If you don't, then we will forever be, you know, chasing our own tail. You know, we won't move past where we've been. And this guy couldn't do it, you know, because again, he couldn't see, you know, the thing about pro wrestling is it differs from every other sport in the sense that every other sport is about competition, but pro wrestling is about cooperation. And if you don't cooperate, then you fail. Then there is no show, you know. everyone is part of the same team, be they good guys or bad guys. And so that's what distinguishes professional wrestling. It's almost communistic, you know. It's the only communist sport out there because, again, you know, everybody has to do their part and everything has to come together in sync. If it doesn't, then it all falls apart.
What kind of audiences would you draw?
Well, that's the thing about professional wrestling is it's got this somewhat deserved image of, you know, attracting all the beer belly rednecks and so forth, you know. And yeah, there's truth to that, but, you know, you'd be surprised. There are a lot of scholars that study professional wrestling. When I interviewed Randy Macho Man Savage, one of the things I asked him about was, is it possible to have it where all the world's disputes could be settled via professional wrestling? He said it's possible if it wasn't choreographed, you know. I actually talked to a guy from the State Department about this. I met him at random at a cafe in Las Vegas. And he said that in order for the United Nations to each have its own professional wrestler, which ain't too far off from what we have today, because just as you have wrestlers representing different countries, you know, the Iron Sheik, Iran, Nikolai Volkov, Russia, etc., in order to have each and every member state of the United Nations have its own professional wrestler, they would have to have it where, how did the guy put it? The issues at stake could not be so great to the point where if your guy lost in the ring, that you would be willing to revert back to the bad old days and grab a gun and a bomb and go to war in a conventional way. So if anything, professional wrestling is also pacifist, since it is choreographed. But even if it was, you know, trial by combat, and even if it was the case where what you were seeing in professional wrestling, you know, was no holds barred and no holding back and so on, if that was the case, then it would still be better than what you have now, where you have Afghan weddings being bombed by accident, collateral damage, whatever, where you have white phosphorus dumped on civilians in Fallujah, where you have people being raped and tortured